The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. Shares of Currys fall by more than 5% as the Chinese e-commerce group JD.com pulls out of the race to take it over. Kazakhstan's Air Astana reports a record number of passengers in its first results since its London flotation. Plus, Vodafone sells its Italian business to Switzerland's biggest telecoms company, Swisscom, for €8 billion. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. Shares of Currys have fallen by more than 5% after the Chinese online retailer JD.com said this afternoon that following careful consideration, it does not intend to make an offer for the UK's biggest electrical goods retailer. The news comes just days after the US activist investor Elliott Advisors walked away from making an offer for the company. Well, a few weeks ago, I spoke with Alex Baldock, he's the Currys chief executive, and he told me how recent trading had been going.
And we've done a really good job of controlling our own costs. There's been a pretty disciplined performance this peak, making the most of the sales that were out there, but making sure that margins and costs were healthy. And that, plus the getting the Nordics back on track, which we needed to do, and we are doing, is what's allowing us to upgrade our profit expectations.
Well, joining me now is Tineke Frikkee. She's head of UK equity investment at Waverton Investment Manager. Tineke, welcome to you. Do you think Alex Baldock and his team will be worried about this turn of events?
Well, probably not. I mean, it's in a way it's encouraging that other people also like what you do. There's obviously been a flurry of interest that now seem to have gone away with Elliott and with JD.com. Frasers has increased their stake, so they're at 6.6%. So it'd be interesting what they can do. But the shares they look really cheap. So hopefully by focusing on the UK and the Nordics, the company can become more profitable themselves.
Yeah, good point you make there. I mean, Elliott were offering 67p a share. JD.com never even got as far as that. I mean, I've seen broker notes this afternoon, Investec say 78p is the target price. Where's realistic fair value for Currys right now?
Yeah, I think I've heard a few different numbers. So when we look at share price, what I've heard from some existing shareholders, they say it needs to be somewhere between 80 pence and £1. Obviously, it's 56p today, so quite a bit of upside. The market cap is about £650 million today, so there's another number I've heard that needs to be about £1 billion. So it's higher than where it is now.
But I mean, that's a huge gap in terms of where it's trading right now. What does that tell you about investor sentiment towards Currys?
Well, if we look at what the market's pricing it at, it's on a price to earnings of 7 times. Which in effect says, you know, that the business is going to be around for 7 years and then it's gone. So that's low. Another way we can look at this at the price to book. So all the asset, they obviously have a lot of inventory. It's 0.3 times. So it tells you it's a very low valuation. But they're also operating in a difficult market with obviously a lot of e-commerce. You know, they need to reposition in that.
Yeah, as you say, it looks laughably cheap, doesn't it? Tineke, we're going to speak to you later on in the programme, but thank you for now.
Thank you.
Now, while last year saw a dearth of flotations on the London Stock Exchange, this year's already seen a major one in the form of Air Astana, the national flag carrier of Kazakhstan. Well, today, the airline, which is the biggest carrier in the Caucasus and Central Asia region, reported record passenger numbers of 8.1 million for 2023. That was up 10% on 2022. But pre-tax profits fell by 14% to $87.1 million due to the 22 results being flattered by thousands of Russians leaving the country via Kazakhstan following Moscow's attack on Ukraine. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Air Astana's chief executive, Peter Foster.
We carried a record number of passengers, 8.1 million. We carry that across our 2 brands. We have a low-cost airline, Fly Aristan. We have a full-service airline, Air Astana. The former has been in business since 2002. As you know, it was a joint venture with BAE Systems and the Sovereign Wealth Fund here in Kazakhstan. The latter started about 4 years ago. We're seeing broad growth across all markets. You know, we're very happy with the performance. We're extremely happy to have listed the company on the 3 exchanges, including London, just a month ago.
Some other business news stories for you now. And Vodafone has sold its Italian business to Swisscom, Switzerland's biggest telecoms company, for €8 billion. Well, when Vodafone Italia is merged with Swisscom's existing operations in the country, it will create Italy's second largest fixed line and broadband operator after Telecom Italia. The deal follows Vodafone's recent sale of its Spanish operations and user plans to merge its UK arm with those of Three. Well, Vodafone entered Italy back in 2001 via its blockbuster takeover of the German telecoms company Manors and renamed the latter's Italian business to Vodafone Italia later that year. Well, Vodafone will return half of the sale proceeds to shareholders via share buybacks. The Competition and Markets Authority said today it's launched an inquiry into the proposed takeover of the house builder Redrow by its larger rival Barratt Developments. The regulator said it was inviting interested parties to submit views to it on the impact that the £2.52 billion transaction announced last month could have on competition in the UK. Well, shares of both Barratt and Redrow have fallen slightly on the news. Elsewhere in the sector, Barclay Group said today that inquiry levels from November to February have been good, with pricing stable across its sites and above business plan levels. And one of the UK's most widely held investment trusts said today it will buy back up to £1 billion worth of its shares over the next 2 years. Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust, one of the earliest investors in Tesla and a major shareholder in tech giants such as Amazon and Nvidia, said it was doing so as a strong demonstration of confidence in the underlying valuation of its portfolio. Well, shares of Scottish Mortgage, which have recently been trading at 16% discount to their net asset value, are up by 3% this afternoon. Now, the golfwear company Manors Golf has raised £1 million in its latest funding round, which it says values the firm at £5 million. The actor Nicholas Hoult is among those who've invested, while 15% was raised through Crowdcube, which allows retail investors to put money into startups. Well, joining me now to talk about this is Jojo Regan, one of the founders. Jojo, welcome to you. What are you going to do with the money?
What are we going to do? It's expensive to run consumer brands, especially ones that have ambitions to grow like we do. The bulk of it goes into what we're best at, and that's content. We're really, really good at creating great, innovative content. Outside of that, talent is important, so we're hiring some of the best people in the industry to work with us on executing on our vision. And then, of course, marketing and activations are a key part of our strategy as well.
Now, you're specifically targeting young people. What sort of things are you doing?
I mean, activations are a really important part of that. You know, you don't necessarily have as many touch points with these big brands as you can do when you're a startup. And us hosting events, those be golf days, viewing of golf events, things like that, where people can get a real touch with the brand and, meet us and we can meet our customers too.
Do you think golf has a problem with young people?
It did. I think that you could definitely argue it did at one point, but the game has never been in a better position. The number of people that are taking up the sport for the first time, the balance of men and women who are playing the game as well and picking up a club, and also the really encouraging numbers coming from the number of really young, under 7-year-olds that are picking up a club as well is very, very exciting to see.
It is quite a costly sport, though, for ordinary folk to take up.
Yes, there's definitely a accessibility issue with golf when you look at the top end where you have country clubs and even just transport. If you live in a city and you want to drive out to go and play a golf course, it can be difficult. But, you have new, driving ranges, you have, putting facilities now, you have indoor golf facilities too. So there's other ways to participate in golf that don't just require you to go and play 18 holes.
What about the business in terms of your revenues? How do they break down between wholesale and retail?
So previously we were much more reliant on wholesale, but we're now really pushing on our e-commerce business, and it's obviously a much better, higher margin, bigger growth and scale potential too. So last year we were looking more like 60%, 65% wholesale. This year the goal will be 50-50, and then the year after we're looking to flip that again.
In terms of direct-to-consumer, the customer base, are you disclosing numbers on how many people you sell to?
We haven't got publicly available figures there. Obviously, our shareholders are very aware of what we're up to. But as a general kind of rule of thumb, about 65% of our business online is going to UK customers, and 30% of that is off to the US, which is a really, really exciting figure to see.
And I think Asia's a growing market for you as well. I mean, obviously, huge for women's golf in particular.
Yeah, Asia is incredible. I mean, look, you've got a rising middle class in countries like India, Indonesia, Thailand, and with that comes the participation in golf. People look to play, and it's a great way for them in their minds to do business. And for us, we're able to tap into that growth. We're much more agile in how we're able to distribute. So we've already found really good traction in markets like Korea, Japan, and now places like Indonesia as well.
You mentioned trying to harness talent and gain recognition that way. What has the PGA Live Golf situation done for you?
Yeah, it'd be rude not to ask a question about that when you're talking golf. I think that my stance on it is that any investment in the game has to be considered a good one. Lots of money's going into it. Of course, a lot of that's going into pockets of certain players, but there's been so much awareness of the sport, good, bad, and from our side, what we're seeing is people are excited about it, and that money's going ultimately into the game.
OK, Jojo, I've got to leave it there. Good to see you today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, last year was a tough one for venture capital, the high-risk investment field that backs startups and growing companies with the potential for fast growth. Undeterred, though, last year, late on, saw Molten Ventures, one of the few quoted VC companies, agree to buy its smaller rival Forward Partners for £41.4 million. Well, the deal, which closed yesterday, brings more than 40 new companies into Molten's portfolio. Well, joining me now to chat about this is Martin Davis. He's Chief Executive of Molten Ventures. Martin, welcome to you. You raised £55 million at the time from investors. I mean, by my crude arithmetic, that leaves you another 14 million to play around with. What have you done with that?
Good afternoon, Ian, and thank you very much for having me on your show. Well, look, our job is to back the best, most exciting companies that are innovating and disrupting tech businesses across Europe. And so we're very excited with the acquisition of Forward Partners. As you said, it brings some very exciting assets to us. And also the fundraise gave us the ability to be able to follow on to realise the full potential of those businesses. But we have a portfolio of 73 other businesses. And so what the fundraiser also allowed us to do was to provide the additional capital to help those businesses grow and to realise their potential.
Which of the portfolio companies that you've acquired are you most excited about?
Well, I think it's difficult. We always say that we, of course, love all of our children, which of course is true. If you look at the larger companies, we've got within the portfolio, there's over 40 companies. There's 15 companies in there that are the majority of the net asset value. Those companies grew at an average of 133% last year. And so overall, it tends to be the larger ones that attract a lot of the focus, and a number of those we are particularly interested in. But I think if you look across the whole portfolio, there's a lot of access to digital transformation and AI. And I think some of the earlier stage companies could well surprise us in the future and be the big winners.
Typically, what sort of stage do you like to back a business?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned earlier that we're high risk. I mean, we are higher risk certainly than the likes of private equity and later stage investing. But most of the companies we invest in, it's slightly later than so. It's not really seed investing. It's later. It's once companies have hit certain proof points. So the likelihood is that they'll be generating revenue. The technology will be proven. Their commercial model will be proven. Quite often the team is already built. And what we do is provide the capital to allow them to grow. So it's really at that kind of growth stage. Once they've hit those certain proof points, that's really where we like to invest.
I mean, it was interesting you mentioned there that you are keeping powder aside to back some of these businesses. What sort of funding requirements do you see from your portfolio companies this year?
Well, actually, our portfolios are very well funded. Part of our job is to help those founders and to help those companies to build the syndicates and to build the funding capacity as they grow. And as they grow, if they're successful, they will need more funding. And so therefore, we build the syndicates to make sure that there are enough investors to be able to follow them through. So most of our later stage companies, in fact, the requirement for us is relatively modest. I think in our results last year, we said we were expecting 20 million to be invested into our companies, which is a portfolio, as you said, of nearly 1.4 billion. And so that's a relatively small amount. But those companies will probably be funded at their later stages through larger companies. There may be strategics, there may be others that are taking them pre-IPO. So our actual requirement to fund those companies is relatively modest.
And in terms of overall confidence, we saw a lot of so-called down rounds last year where a company raises money at a lower implied valuation than before. Klarna was a good example, Checkout.com another. Has that done much damage to sentiment within the sector, do you feel?
Yeah, I think there's two things at play here. One is, and Klarna is an example possibly of maybe some valuations getting a little bit ahead of the businesses. People were setting valuations set on at a time in the future that in a different environment, and so I think some got a little bit ahead of their themselves maybe with some of the valuations. But in general terms, look, the top tier assets, that those founders and those innovative companies that are disrupting value chains and that are bringing real disruption or deep technology that is really changing the way we live our lives, the way that we manage our health, indeed the climate. Those companies generally don't have difficulty in raising capital. So, but I think everybody is a little bit more cautious than they were when money was free 3 to 4 years ago. I think that's quite clear.
Absolutely. Martin, we didn't really get to talk enough in detail about the portfolio companies. I hope we can do so in future. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for having me on the show.
Still to come here on Business Live, we'll have a look at how the markets have finished this week. Stay with us.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Traveling is not just about the destination. It's also about how you get there. Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Well, in Europe, stocks are heading into the weekend on a largely positive note. I can show you the picture in mainland Europe now. Look at that. They've all finished in positive territory. The star performer there, the IBEX in Madrid, up nearly 1.25%. Talking points today in mainland Europe, they include Vonovia. That's Germany's largest residential landlord. The shares there have fallen 7% following a write-down in property values, which pushed the company to its biggest ever loss. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is going into the weekend on a slightly downward note. They're off a fifth of 1% right now. The big story in the FTSE today, no doubt about it, Reckitt Benckiser, the shares have fallen 16%. That is on news that it must pay $60 million to the family of a baby which died after being fed its infant formula. The company is appealing against that decision. In terms of the gainers, well, the leading blue chip gainer this afternoon in percentage terms is Vodafone, up nearly 6%. That's on news of the sale of Vodafone Italia and an accompanying share buyback. While International Airlines Group, look at that, that's actually top of the leaderboard, up nearly 6.25%. That is on news that Moody's has put the company on review for a possible credit upgrade. Meanwhile, Scottish Mortgage Trust, which I mentioned earlier in the programme, look at that, that's finished up 5.5% on that share buyback news. Very, very popular stock indeed, that one. Outside the FTSE 100, one among the leading mid-cap gainers is Volution, the ventilation products company. That's up nearly 3% on its results. If you were watching this morning, you'll have seen Ronnie George, the chief executive, on our morning edition. Meanwhile, the thermal processing services provider Bodycote, the shares have finished up nearly 2.5% on its results. Over on Wall Street, well, the main indices have opened to the downside. Nasdaq currently off by more than 1%. And I think a factor there is probably Adobe. That's currently off some 14% after it warned that sales for the second quarter of this year will come in below expectations. On the foreign exchange markets, pretty quiet, to be honest. Sterling is off a sixth of 1% or so against the dollar and a fifth of 1% against the euro. Single currency more or less unchanged against the greenback. The pound is actually heading for its biggest weekly loss against the dollar since December. That's ahead of next week's interest rate decision from the Bank of England, of course. Meanwhile, the oil price, after 2 days of solid gains on concerns over a supply deficit, during which the oil price actually hit its highest level yesterday since the 6th of November. Barrel of Brent crude currently changing hands at $85.41 a barrel. It's more or less unchanged right now. It's a bit of a rally from this morning, in fact. Well, joining me again is Tineke Frikkee, Head of UK Equity Research at Waverton Investment Management. Tineke, thanks for coming back to us. Big story this afternoon, Reckitt. I mean, the shares have just carried on falling all day.
That's right. And the surprising thing was that a story broke last night that this Illinois state court has found in favour of this poor lady who lost her premature born infant for $60 million. And nothing kind of happened until somehow both Reckitt and Abbott Labs, this is the US, another major provider of infant milk. But yeah, big story. I mean, this lawsuit was filed in January 2022 and Reckitt had disclosed it, but said we don't quite know what this means. There is no scientific evidence. So Reckitt will appeal, but it's big news, and clearly this is not, the bad news is not going to stop here.
No, I mean, the thing that occurs to me here is it bought this big infant milk producer a few years ago, and it's been nothing but trouble. They obviously had to sell the Chinese part of it and took a huge write-down on there. They should have just stuck to their knitting.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, when they bought it, they spent a lot of money, took on a lot of debt. First, they lost their competitive edge in Asia, so that was kind of sold, and then the US was left as the star of the show, and that is now under a cloud. So, yeah, couldn't agree more. You know, they should have just stuck to what they're doing because they do that well.
Yeah. Well, one company that's doing less of what it was doing before is Vodafone. I mean, it's a sort of great fire sale of assets continues today in Italy.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I've been around for quite a while, Ian. And obviously, it used to be that these Vodafone, they get bigger and bigger and plant more flags in different countries. And then gradually all those flags get pulled out. So, which is a good thing because being in the mobile phone broadband business is very competitive because, to be honest, the end product is all kind of the same. So, it works best when there's only 3 players. So yes, so Italy now sold, Spain now sold, UK trying to merge. So they're trying to be left with markets where they feel they have an edge. They had too much debt, their dividend was too high, so they're rebasing all that. So it all seemed that it's getting more sensible.
Yeah, we've only got about 30 seconds left or so, but Scottish Mortgage, a lot of the viewers will be interested in what you've got to say about that.
Yeah, and because I think Scottish Mortgage is part of the whole investment trust area. We talked about the cheapness in curries earlier. A lot of these investment trusts are trading at really big discounts, which means that because they invest in quoted companies, that they, the prices are a lot below intrinsic value. So, this is a big share buyback, £1 billion for Scottish Mortgage. For the past 2 years, they did £350 million, so it's 9% of market cap. So it's really the boards trying to get these discounts to close.
That's very big. Frikkee, Tineke, got to leave it there. Good to see you today. Thank you. That's it from me. I'm back on Monday morning at 11:30. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, up next, it's Simon Mosin with the News Hour. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great weekend. Cheerio.